Hello, good morning and welcome to today's webinar exploring the theme of retail business optimization. For the next hour, you'll hear from exciting speakers from the likes of John Lewis from Boohoo Group, Swift and EasyJet. Our speakers will be sharing insights into how their organizations are adapting to ensure continuity, growth and innovation in a very turbulent business environment that hasn't got any easier over the past week. So let's do some quick housekeeping before we start today's webinar. My name is Nicholas Webber and I'll be your host this morning. I'm Business Consultancy Director here at Inviqa. And if you've never come across Inviqa before, we are a company that helps digital commerce businesses shape their digital products and their processes and the platforms they need to achieve their strategic ambition. And it doesn't matter whether it's on business optimization or expansion or transformation, we cover it all. So this morning, my co-host is Brian Darby, a partner at Gate One, which is one of Inviqa's sister agencies here within the Havas Group. So good morning, Brian. Would you like to quickly introduce us to Gate One?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Of course, I'm Brian, a partner here at Gate One. Nice to meet you all. We're a digital and business transformation consultancy, and we work with the leadership teams of many brands and their businesses to design and deliver significant changes, both to their own operations and also their customer propositions.
Thanks very much indeed, Brian. So let's go quickly to understand a little bit more about the format of this morning's webinar. So we've got about an hour and we're going to wrap up very promptly at 10 a.m. First off, we've got a short presentation from Will Clayton, who's Head of Innovation at the Boohoo Group. And Will's going to be exploring how the retail group is addressing technical debt and using data to optimize its processes and drive innovation. And at about 9:20, we'll move to our retail business leaders panel, which Clinton Manning will be hosting. And Clinton is a former journalist and the retail lead at Maitland, which is another of our partner agencies here at Havas. The panel conversation will run for about half an hour, and then we'll move on to audience Q&A at 10 to 10. So if you'd like to submit your questions, please do so using the Zoom Q&A feature on your screen, and you can post a question at any stage through this morning's webinar, and we'll get to answer as many of those as we possibly can at about 10 to 10. If your question is for a particular speaker, just please mention their name when you're posting your question, and that speaker will get that question to them directly. This webinar is being recorded, so if for any reason you've got to drop off, you can come back and play this in your own time, and we'll be making that link available at the end of this session. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Will for his presentation. Good morning, Will.
Good morning. Thank you very much. And good morning, everyone else. Thank you for being here. It's great to speak to you all. So I will get this going. Show on the road. So my name is Will Clayton. I am the Head of Innovation here at Boohoo Group. I've been in the group for about 4.5 years, in which time I've covered a couple of different roles in transformation and in technology across the business. And really my role now is about how I take the foundational blocks we've done in the past and take them forwards. And a lot of that comes back to how we can make better use of data, how we can optimize our processes and become more efficient and give a better customer service as we've grown as a group. Who are Boohoo Group? I'm sure many of you know quite a lot about the group, but our vision is to be leading the e-commerce fashion market for 16 to 45-year-olds. The group's been around for 16 years, starting in 2006 with Boohoo, and 2013 our first menswear brand with Boohoo Man. But really in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, we've seen a big growth in the number of brands within our portfolio. A lot of those names on there will be hugely familiar to you as staples of the British High Street, or former staples of the British High Street. In terms of our scale, last year we had revenues which were just short of £2 billion, 62 million orders and 20 million active customers. When I joined the group back in 2018, I think the prior year had been about 500 million. So the growth over those past few years has been quite huge. How do we operate as a group? Well, this is something which I think it's well documented in terms of the sort of test and repeat process we have. But I think it's quite key to understand that when we look at growth and optimizing our processes as a business. So the first thing we do is we really monitor what's going on in the market at the time. So we intend to follow fashion quite quickly. You can see how trends are changing and react to that. So we're monitoring what's going on, seeing how products are performing, what's happening on the likes of Instagram and other places in terms of influencer behavior as well. What we'll then do is we'll test small volumes of products, launch them in the market, and see which ones work. And from that, you can make decisions about which ones we're going to keep and buy into in more depth, and that's the repeat process, and which ones we're not, and we're just going to sell through, and those products won't be repeated over time. And when you look at what that is and the way the group has grown in that period of time, one of the challenges we faced a few years ago, actually just prior to the pandemic, was really when we asked this question, was how do we optimize our processes to support the growth that we're going through? And when you think about an e-commerce business like ours, pure play online fashion, there's elements of those processes which are quite linear. So as we grow, we have to have more orders, we have to pick more products from a warehouse, we have to put more products into packages and send them around. So the fulfillment, the picking and the packing processes grow in this linear kind of way. There's other processes in there which at the time were linear, but perhaps you could do things with them to optimize them and make them have a more of a scalable approach. And so those would be things like the decision-making processes around forecasting and planning of products and so on. The area I'm going to focus on is one which I've focused on for the last couple of years, and that's actually around that core managing processes process. So how do we create products, how do we then manage them, and how do we get them on the website? A couple of years ago, we were probably launching around 1,000 new products every single week with the brands that we had at the time. This, up till now, it's probably more like 2,000 to 2,500 at times. So there's been a huge growth in the way that we're launching new products and then monitoring how they work. So how do we go about it? So about 2.5 years ago, this is roughly what the process looked like for creating a new product and getting it onto our websites. And it varied a little bit by brand, and there are some nuances to this, but this is pretty much the outline process. We'd have an idea for that new product, which could come from inspiration from what we've seen in other places. It could come from an amendment to an existing product we have. Typically then we'd be writing a paper order on carbon copy paper and noting down what that product was, attributing its taxonomy, and effectively it would be handwritten, potentially quite scribbly writing done quite quickly, which would then be copied by another person into our ERP system. So already we're double keying information, and we've got this potential for mismatch with that information as well, as it's not fully understood by the person who's rekeying it. Because of that, we'd then be making some edits in that ERP system before we export the data to our website, and then that's when we start categorizing it. So slightly strangely, we've taken the data to the website, then we're doing the categorization. At this point, we're shifting between buying and merchandising on our e-commerce teams. There's handoffs between teams as well. Finally, at the end of the process, we then enrich that data further. So our translations or any deep tags from visual AI happen directly onto the website, which meant that data is great in terms of search and discovery and the localization for different parts of the world, but that data wasn't finding its way back into the systems that our buyers and merchandisers would use to understand trends and things. Ultimately, though, that gets the product to the customer and they can buy it. So what we did with that process was kind of break it down into 3 chunks. Now, you'll notice I've only put 2 brackets on the page. However, there are 3 chunks to that process. There's product creation, which is that beginning part, and then there's enrichment and publishing. Now, the reason why there's only 1 bracket for enrichment and publishing is because some of that's back to front and it's all a bit mixed together. So what we did, like any good story, is went for a beginning, a middle, and an end to this process. So we'll start at the beginning. So that is product creation. Now, I've already given a little bit of insight into what might be the problems with product creation in the old process. A lot of it was the fact that we were doing things very manually, writing things onto paper and copying it into our systems. One of the problems we had with our legacy ERP system was that that actually encumbered the process yet further. It could take 15, 20, 25 minutes at times to get that information into the ERP system, purely because of the volume we were trying to put in at once, and the database locks up and things slow down. That's notwithstanding the problem you had with that data often being incorrect because we're trying to read someone else's handwriting and rekey it into a system. There was a lack of validation on that data as well, which meant at times you could get products being attributed in completely incorrect ways. What we did with this part of the process was put in place a digitized workflow, a digitized way of working, and that's through something we called Order App. It's not the most imaginative name, but it does explain what it does. So what Order App does is essentially gives our buyers and our merchandisers a tool they can use on their phones, tablets, or laptops. They can create a product and order wherever they are in the world. It works offline as well. Allows them to add in all the information about that product, add some photos of it as well. They can add notes. They can then provide a copy to the supplier, so the supplier knows what they're doing, but it also digitizes the data from the point of entry, allows those orders to be managed, and we can understand their status and where they're up to, and you can also do review and approval of those orders directly in the app as well. Creating an order in this way gives us improved efficiency and much better data capture. And in terms of the timing for doing this, it takes about 2 minutes to create an order in Order App. The approvals and things take an extra couple of minutes or so as you're reviewing the data, but you're taking a process which was probably 20-25 minutes down to 2 or 3 if needs be. And that's really critical in a business like ours where speed is of the essence. The second part of that process which came along, and this is where we became involved with Inviqa as well, was around product enrichment and the management of the product information once it's been input. And that really comes down to product information management. So you can see on this diagram, Order App's over there on the left-hand side. And what we did was we put in place a better backbone to our product information. We created Order App to work with our legacy systems at the time, and we had to manually configure the data options in there. So it had validation on that data, but it required quite a lot of configuration to ensure the options were valid. What we've done by implementing a PIM system, and we went with Akeneo, was we can now link Order App and the options available in it directly to the attributes and product types that we want to manage in Akeneo. That means that the data integrity from Order App through into our PIM system is fully intact. We actually run a couple of customizations there on the front end as well, which allows us to generate our SKUs directly into PIM. So we don't have to have Order App talking to ERP to get a SKU code, then into our PIM to enrich it. We go straight into the PIM. What we then can do with that data, now that it's more consistent and it's in a central place, is use it for more things. And this is where you can really optimize that workflow. So already you can see the workflow for getting a product from point of creation through to the websites. It looks a little bit complicated, of course, but it's a lot simpler and it's more data-driven and more dynamic than it ever was before. That information from PIM is what we use as the single source of truth for our products. So it goes to our ERP and finance systems, goes to our warehouse management systems, and it also goes to Products DB. Products DB is essentially our forward cache, where we also can bring in information around pricing and stock levels. And that can be used then to power the websites and product feeds. So this is great. This is a great foundation to having solid product data, one source of the truth everyone agrees on. But what can we do next? How can we take this that step further and get more efficiency from it? And that's the third part of the story. That's when we come into this world of publishing. Now, strictly, one of the things I'm going to say on here isn't actually publishing, but it does actually aid publishing, and that's why I've included it in this section. And this is where we're looking at taking that process we've got, where we've digitized what was a manual workflow, we've removed rekeying of data, and we've got consistency. How can we use AI and automation to take it that step further? And this is the stuff which I'm now looking at in the business. So there's 2 blobs in yellow on this page. The diagram's updated slightly. The one on the left is really around how we can use AI to supplement the information that we've got already from our buyers. So Order App's still feeding in, they're making amends directly in PIM or using Product Wizard. But what we're actually able to do now is take the visual tags that would have gone straight to the websites in the past and bring them back into PIM. Initially, this is to fill in blanks where we might not have filled it in at the point of product creation, but ultimately you could use this to start reducing the burden on buyers in Order App and actually use the AI to provide some of those tags instead. What I'm talking about here is things like necklines and sleeve lengths, the lengths of dresses, things which you can quite obviously get from an image of a product. We're a pure play e-commerce business, so we have photos of all our products, so we can use this technology in a really quite powerful way. On the right-hand side is Auto Categorizer. So as I mentioned before, we this point in time, launching potentially 2,000, 2,500 new products every single week across those brands. And we've got a huge number of legacy products as well within PIM. Making sure those are visible to customers in the way those customers are searching for them is critical to getting a good sales performance. At the moment, that process is mostly manual. The e-commerce team have to look at what the tags say and what the photos are and assign the products to those categories. Any particular website might have 1,500 categories to assign products to, and a product can belong to more than one. So if you have a dress which is black and lace and V-neck with short sleeves, and it's in a midi length, it could fit into something like 15 different categories for midi length dresses and black dresses and so on. What Auto Categorizer does is it takes that legwork off the e-commerce team, and it can do it automatically. It changes their role from being one of assigning individual products to assigning the rules that will automatically assign those products. And that really gives you that scale and the ability to categorize en masse and at speed. What that gives us is this ability to have efficient, data-driven publishing for our products. And for a business like ours that has so many products going through, that's really key to optimizing this part of our business as well. So overall, what that product workflow ends up looking like is something like this. We've got the ideas still at the beginning. We're digitally creating those products and those orders in Order App. We're storing that data in a consistent centralized format in PIM, supplementing that information using AI where we can, automating the way we do category assignment, then we're exporting and publishing on the websites so our customers can buy it. And by doing so, that really optimizes our workflow and sets us in a position that we can carry on with sustained growth. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Will. Thanks very much for sharing your example there of business optimization. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions that come through asking a little bit more about that when we have our Q&A session a little bit later on. So for anyone who does want to pose any questions to Will, please make sure you add Will's name in that question, and please add it to the Zoom Q&A that you see on your screen, and we'll be collecting those questions, and around 10 to 10, Will and the rest of the panel will be answering those. So let's go to Clinton, and who's going to start our panel discussion this morning, and we will have a very interesting conversation there. Over to you, Clinton.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining, and thanks very much to Will for a fascinating talk there. As Nick mentioned earlier, I'm Clinton. I'm a partner at H Advisors Maitland, which is another of the sister Havas agencies, and I head up our retail team, working for a combination of listed and private businesses. I've been a communications consultant for over a decade now, but before that I was a business and city editor on national newspapers for 20 years. So I guess I've been asked to ask the questions because I spent 20 years asking the awkward ones of business. So the theme of today's panel is how to optimize retail business performance in turbulent times. I think it's fair to say that the environment in which you are all operating has become a lot more volatile and unpredictable since Friday's mini budget. As if life wasn't difficult enough, you were already facing strong headwinds. We've got inflation at a 40-year high, soaring energy bills and freight costs, as you'll all be aware, interest rates at their highest for a decade, and labour shortages. And much of this has been caused by events way beyond your control. 3 seismic events, principally: Brexit, the pandemic, and then the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, your customers and colleagues are wrestling with the cost of living crisis that stems from these events, and now the fallout from Friday. I think in this climate, the challenge is, how do you as businesses avoid being blown off course? How do you remain focused and find effective, low-risk ways to adapt your processes and platforms and retain the talent you need to survive, let alone innovate and grow? So we're going to hear from a really interesting, diverse group of business leaders how they are approaching these challenges and what they've been learning along the way. But just before we get started, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and their businesses. So Jeff, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Jeff, CMO from Swift Home. We're a 2-year-old startup. We launched in the pandemic, beginning of 2020, and we're a sofa in a box business. And we've, despite all the headwinds, we've seen a lot of growth over the last 2 years.
Lou, do you want to go next?
Hi everyone, pleasure to meet everyone. I'm Lou Nichols, so former Chief Customer Officer M&Co, and prior to that, John Lewis for quite a number of years, and led the digital and social team through the COVID period there.
Simon?
Hi everybody, I'm Simon Cox, work for EasyJet, and I lead the in-flight retail business, which effectively is a business within a business, everything that is available to buy on board. And unlike the other panelists, I'm relatively new to the world of retail, and we're undergoing a big transformation project within EasyJet to adopt a retail mindset on board. So nice to meet everybody.
And last but not least, Julian.
Good morning, Clinton. Good morning, everybody. I'm Julian Burnett. I'm an independent board advisor. I've spent the last 20 years or so leading digital transformation in and around the UK retail industry for organisations including Sainsbury's, John Lewis, and House Fraser. Latterly, I've led IBM's business in the industry as well, but now operate independently as an advisor.
So thanks everyone. I think you'll all agree, very diverse and interesting panel, involved very much at the sharp end of things. Look, I think there's only one place to start, isn't it? And if this is a topical discussion, the new government's economic policies and the shockwaves from Friday's mini budget, as I alluded to before, life was already tough, but it's got a lot tougher in the last few days. Are you concerned that what was an already challenging environment just got a whole lot worse, you know, just as we're approaching the critical Christmas trading period? Jeff, maybe you can start with you.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. Like the news is changing every minute, it feels at the moment. But our mindset is very much control the controllables, and continue to focus on where we can add value and offer value to the customer. And what we've seen, even through a really turbulent 2.5 years since we were started, is that still works. We've grown to sort of 25 million in about 2 years, offering a very differentiated product where we're really trying to put the customer first and challenging the category to do that. So I think for those brands that can do that and can offer something different, there's still plenty of hope out there.
Do you not think, though, that I mean, the big worry is what the impact of rising rates is going to have on the housing market in particular? Your fortunes must be very closely tied to that. Is that not a big concern?
For some customer segments, moving house is a big driver, but fortunately, there are other segments where people are doing other things. So yeah, we're definitely going to have to find a business to replace that certainly in the short term, as people maybe pull back or pause their decisions or are unable to move house, that they may well make a bit of a change to things.
Lou, maybe I turn to you. I mean, businesses like John Lewis, they must be very concerned about this, mustn't they, as we rapidly move towards Christmas?
I think there's probably not a retailer out there that isn't concerned at the moment. I think a lot of retailers are still mopping up the annualization from the COVID period. So if you over-indexed in home, if you over-indexed in athleisure wear, the annualization of that is significant. And then you've got kind of fast fashion, and they always say that beauty is recession proof. So retailers that have a broad spectrum of assortments are probably better set up to weather that storm than retailers that are category specific, unless that category, of course, is deemed recession proof. But I think Jeff makes a good point around it's understanding your customer and being in the space that your customer is in, putting yourself in the mindset of your customer, and then orchestrating your marketing strategy, your customer strategy, your trading strategy around that, and not trying to just do what you always do. And I think COVID period has taught us that we are able to mobilize huge, big tanker ship businesses in an agile way when your back is against the wall. So we've almost learned a lot through COVID to be able to weather storms that now continue to hit us.
I think you lead us really quite nicely there to a topic. If we turn the clock back a little bit and think about what businesses have learned through COVID, I mean, obviously that was an incredibly challenging time for every business. What do you think the big lessons and takeaways are from that period for you then, Lou?
I think it was interesting. I was casting my mind back, and remember when the government sort of said, right, we're shopping all non-essential stores, and you know, it was luck which camp you jumped into, because no one had time to make decisions. So we saw some big retailers pausing their online operations so they can mobilize their teams and make sure that they were doing all the due diligence in the distribution centers. And then other retailers decided to keep that on and continue to trade, and you saw the winners and losers there, but no one had any more insight than anyone else. It was really luck of the draw there. But I think as we move through from a people and culture perspective, you know, we've learned loads around how you manage and motivate and, you know, high performing teams virtually, how we work in a hybrid way. I mean, certainly when you look at grocery, for example, they have been spinning around trying to increase their percentage of online sales for years, and it was just so complex they couldn't get there. And then overnight, funnily enough, back against the wall, it was an option of going under or trading, and suddenly everyone mobilized around it and was able to facilitate it. So hopefully we'll take those learns forward in whatever hits us next. It's casting our mind back to go, look what was achieved, and in what was weeks in some businesses that would have taken years to just get over the line.
Simon, there's a few industries that can have been hit harder during that period than the airline industry and travel. How did you guys cope, and what have you taken away and learnt to sort of going forward?
I think I would just tap into that kind of thought that Lou just expressed about the need for agility, and that nobody knows more than anybody else. Our business model was built on the fact that we offer low fares, you book your fare, and we're a non-refundable, non-transferable product. And when you stop flying, you ultimately have to give the customer the ability to do that. And there was a very real possibility. We saw all cash disappear from the airline because we take cash in advance, etc. So turning on systems that allowed people to, so we needed to create overnight a voucher system that allowed us to keep cash in the business, offer flexibility, and we're just not built around that. But the agility of our people is what we will take from that, and the ability and the need to take risks in deciding maybe where you're going to fly in a world where restrictions could come in overnight, and just acknowledge that there's going to be risk in there, and some of those decisions are going to turn out to be wrong. But in order to make the right decisions, you do need to make decisions. So advocating for decision making and a degree of risk taking, I think, is what we would take out the pandemic period into how we trade going forward.
Julian, as an advisor to boards, you must have spent a lot of time with people tearing their hair out during that period. What were the main challenges that you encountered, and what do you think businesses have taken out of it in a positive way?
Look, I think retail has attempted over successive cycles to engage closer and closer to its customers to understand their needs and demands. One of the things that has driven up is the concept that choice and convenience are important factors for customers. Actually, through the pandemic, most of the organizations I was involved with took some counterintuitive decisions to reduce choice and reduce convenience so that they could focus on the core offer to their customers. And I think now actually the lessons learned from that is that organizations that have that ability and developed it through the pandemic, their ability to flex their range up and down, their ability to flex their price strategy up and down, their ability to be very selective in what they offer in terms of fulfillment commitments. Those organizations that were able to vary in those dimensions more quickly than others actually managed to optimize their cost exposure and maintain customer engagement and loyalty. And I think they're the qualities that we'll likely see succeeding through this next phase. In terms of preparation for peak, by the way, most deals are done. So the retail industry at this point in the year are already filling up their warehouses ready for the expectation. And so therein lies another set of challenges, that there's stock already moving this way, it's already here, and it's already priced in with an intake margin that you can't vary from. And so challenging pricing strategies and marketing budgets at this point will be quite a significant part of what most retail leadership teams are thinking about and talking about a lot.
I guess one of the things that we saw a lot during the pandemic, with stores closing in particular, was obviously, as Lou alluded to, the shift towards online, and that balance between clicks and bricks. How is that playing out now, though, and how are businesses finding what is the optimum balance between those means of reaching customers? Omni-channel has been talked about for many years, but it seems to be more important than ever, really. I mean, I could pick that one up first.
Yeah, if I might just comment. I mean, look, the three big costs in retail, and just to be really clear, they are bigger than all others added up in many respects: stock, space, and labor. And so optimizing your intake inventory, making sure you've got only as much as you need, and that your space commitment in terms of physical stores or distribution centers, and they do come at a different cost per square foot, but there's a variation based on what inventory you're holding. But the labor challenge, I think, is the one that we must come back to time and time again. The retail industry is an industry of 3.5 million people, and those people, 30% of whom actually don't want to work in it anymore. We've been creating scenarios over the last few years through the pandemic and subsequently through Brexit that's made that an awful lot more difficult. And so finding the sweet spot between your labor opportunity, your space costs, and your stock, they're really the place where most focus and attention will be. The opportunity in terms of shifting the balance between stores and online, actually that's about managing availability of inventory, because all of your costs are a foregone conclusion. It's about having the ability to switch quickly to demand. And if that demand's coming through the online channel and you're able to fulfill it, great. If it's coming through stores, great. But your ability to sense that demand and respond to that demand cost effectively, really that distinguishes those that win and lose in this world.
And so do you think we're going to see big changes in supply chain? I mean, there's been an awful lot, the global supply chains have been heavily disrupted throughout the pandemic.
Hugely
I
so.
think a lot of businesses were actually, are in fact, in some cases now, choosing to hold more stock rather than less. I mean, rather than just in time, I've heard the phrase bandied about, which I quite like, which is just in case. You hold more stock just in case the unexpected hits again. Jeff, you've got an innovative sort of supply chain model, haven't you? How is this impacting you, and how is this helping you win?
Yeah, so we're vertically integrated. So we manufacture in Portugal sofas, and then they're shipped to the UK. It takes 3 or 4 days to get them to the UK, and then they're held in a warehouse in the UK, and then they're shipped 24 hours. So you can order up until 5 o'clock today and receive a delivery tomorrow for the sofa. Actually, though, what we're trying to do is still work to a just-in-time model. So we want to hold as little as possible in raw materials, as little as possible as work in progress in Portugal, and as little as possible in the UK. And we spend a large part of our week managing that process. But it's really important from a cash flow perspective. We just don't want to tie up millions of pounds in stock that's sitting in a warehouse.
Isn't there risk associated with that, in the sense that if the unexpected does hit, you could be left with not enough product to fulfill the demand?
Yeah, we're trying to run on a couple of weeks cover on a relatively steady demand curve, and there have been periods in the last 18 months where we've had bumper weeks and it's kind of consumed all that stock. But actually, because our offer is so quick, most customers going into a store for a sofa might have to wait 3 months. What we tend to find is we could catch up. So even if this week we doubled sales, it might take us 2 or 3 weeks. We could take notifications of interest from customers, and within 2 or 3 weeks we'll have restocked and been able to fulfill it. So our model is very much be as nimble as possible and as fast to recover as possible, and we see that as our resilience, rather than trying to ask the bank for money so we can sit on stock.
Simon, how does this sort of supply, how does that impact a business like yours?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen supply chain issues, and we're in a fairly high margin part of the business. So actually carrying stock, I'm definitely in the kind of just in case camp. We carry food products that originate from Ukraine. We carry consumer products that are being manufactured in China. So, and we, typically we have parts of our kind of offering, we have a fairly static brochure on board that is printed, weeks in advance. So actually certainty plays a bigger part for us, and we would err towards the size of kind of just in case. But that's to kind of Jeff's point, you go back to your business model and how that's built and what's important to you to decide as to what what the right approach would be for your own.
You can't catch up in the way that Jeff can. So if a plane flies a group of passengers and you haven't got the stuff to sell them on board, you don't get that chance again, do you?
No, absolutely. It's an absolutely entirely perishable kind of product, whether it's literally perishable because it's a sandwich, or as you say, if the stock's not in there at the point of purchase, then the opportunity to sell's gone.
Lou, is there anything you want to add on this? Otherwise, I'd like to turn really to the other piece that Julian was alluding to there about people, because that feels like one of the really big challenges for the industry. The inflation that we've been seeing, which is obviously impacting customers, is also impacting your colleagues. And a lot of businesses are having to do and are taking measures to make additional payments to keep people, and to there's a big competition for talent out there, isn't there? How is that impacting? How is that impacting you?
Yeah, I think it is, and we've seen that exponential growth in the demand for digital talent from COVID, and actually it continues. So it is very much an employees market at the moment, and you're seeing that it's costing firms a lot more to keep people because the churn is just so much greater. So I think that will continue. But yes, we've seen the likes of M&S, John Lewis, come out and sort of say that they are supporting their workforce, giving £500, for example, and just making sure and monitoring anyone that is on the lower salary bands, making sure that they're supported. And I think, nudging on what we were saying earlier around how do you weather this storm, I think a lot of it, if you look at the Gen Zs, even the millennials, a lot of it is to do with what are the actions these brands and businesses are taking to show that they care about their employees, to show that they care about their customers. And so to build that trust and loyalty, it only takes 2 seconds to lose it and for people to turn. I mean, just look at the Holly and the Phil thing last week with the Queen's death. That literally turned on a sixpence overnight, and it's seemingly quite a small act that they did there. So people are very aware, and the Gen Zs in particular, they will switch their allegiance to a brand overnight. So I think it's authenticity, it's trust and care.
Yeah, so it goes actually quite a lot beyond just money, doesn't it? It's
100%.
Culture and how
action.
you treat people, and opportunities and training.
Yes. Yeah.
Jeff, what are you seeing in that? Are you finding it harder to find the talent you need, or to keep the people you want?
No, we actually, one of the things we've taken from the pandemic is we've remained working from home. So in the factory in Portugal, we've got 150 people working every day, and but in the UK, everyone's at home. So it's been great. We've been able to hire people from right around the country. People, if we were stuck in London, we wouldn't have got to. So that's really helped. That's been a good outcome for us.
Julian, this must be one of the headaches that your clients are wrestling with, isn't it?
Unbelievable. I mean, I'm an ambassador for the Retail Trust as well. We represent the industry in terms of people and their engagement. We've seen huge levels of attrition. We've seen mental health issues in the industry escalating, financial health issues as well. Every 37 minutes, somebody phones the crisis line at Retail Trust asking for help. It's not surprising, therefore, that most retailers are worried about how they gain and maintain engagement with their colleagues. I think the answer here is really to recognise, for most people in retail, working in stores, working in distribution centres, they genuinely work to live. They do not live to work. This is an industry that employs 60% of its workforce on a part-time basis. It's an industry that employs 60% of women. And so the combination of those factors makes for a very challenging requirement from an engagement perspective. But I think the key is around flexibility. and providing flexibility of shift patterns, providing flexibility of training, learning and development opportunities and progression. And I think those organizations that are able to recognize the importance of their people through digital engagement channels and through an ability to reach out to their employees and keep them part of the culture of the retail industry and the organization, because this is a hugely vibrant industry where, and I would argue it's what I'd describe as a seedbed industry. People plant themselves in retail and grow careers here. We cannot, as an industry, afford to lose that, but it is very challenging. And provision of food, provision of financial assistance, provision of self-help schemes, all of these things are making a difference. But the flexibility that retailers can offer, I think, is probably the primary benefit.
It's interesting you highlight that, because obviously hybrid working has become a big thing. I think several of us
not if you work in shops, Clinton. It's not an option.
That's the point. That's the point I was going to make. That's much more difficult, isn't it? If you're at the sharp end, if you're in head office or you're in supply chain or so on, that hybrid working and that flexibility is probably easy to manage. But if you're on the shop floor, other than saying you can have limited hours or you can have flexible hours, how do you tackle that? Simon, it must be even more difficult on planes. I mean, you've got to be there.
You do, for sure. I think offering kind of certainty. I mean, we really suffered, as people saw in the early part of the summer, with kind of getting a schedule that we could genuinely fly. And one of the bits of feedback from the crew was just the amount of lifestyle disruption we were putting into their lives. So getting that kind of element of certainty is a huge part. So looking at kind of fixed roster patterns and those sorts of things, and allowing kind of digital tools to allow some flexibility, because that workforce is completely capable of self-organizing, doing its own swaps, etc. So that could be one of the keys. I think one of the challenges we're going to face into, having had a period in which we haven't been flying, and our workforce has then subsequently gone off and tried other jobs in other industries, is a kind of loss of collective experience. And also, how do you then identify what it means to work for a brand like EasyJet? Because we've taken some efficiency measures, like taking out the need to go to the crew room. So you go straight to the aircraft, you might meet the people you're flying with for the first time at the aircraft. So how do you get a sense of the company, the brand which we're representing? So those are some of the other people challenges we're going to lean into. Just to give you some sort of idea, probably over 25% of our crew are going to be new to flying by the time we reach next summer. So that's a big challenge as we go through the winter.
Simon, you make a really, really important point there. Collective wisdom is something that retail depends upon day in, day out. The knowledge in the workforce is what really carries most retailers through most days. And as that loss of knowledge has an impact, we're going to see not just in stores, distribution centres, and in your world in planes, but actually at head office, there's a risk of reduction in knowledge and an increase in what I would describe as wheel reinvention. There's a lot of problems that get solved over and over and over and over and over again in retail. And just thinking about what Will presented earlier in terms of process optimization, there's a real advantage to those organizations that retain knowledge, not just in people, but in their processes, and are able to quickly assimilate that knowledge through systems. And so again, I'm sort of beating the drum for technology and data here, because finding a way of avoiding the reinvention of wheels is always a good thing.
So just picking up on processes and data, one of the other massive challenges that retail has, I think, at the moment is around returns. The shift that we've seen, obviously, to much more business online. And now we started seeing some retailers charging for returns. It's no longer free. Not that it was probably ever really free, I guess, but priced into the product. How big a headache do you think that is for the industry, and what can you do to get your heads and data around that issue, which is a huge cost to the industry? And do you think we will see more and more businesses charging for returns?
I think it is, and it isn't a headache. I think when we started to see that huge rise in returns and fashion, and I remember every event out there was a round table discussion around how do we stem returns, and businesses focused on, was it the product information that was incorrect, were the imageries poor, and so people didn't know what they were buying. And in actual fact, if anyone has stood back and actually looked at the data and talked to the customers, it was nothing to do with that. It was the fact that customers had just got used to buying 3 dresses with the sole purpose of only keeping one and trying it on at home. And so as soon as retailers caught onto that and understood that, you can then structure your communications and how you help customers shop, and then just understand that. So if people are going to return, how do you mobilize your teams and your business and your profit models around that, rather than trying to stop them return, because that's just not the case. I think where isn't
the problem that you're going to have, people are going to order the 3 dresses, 2 are going to come back, but you don't know which 2, and therefore you don't know which 2 to reorder.
Absolutely. There is a big challenge around reverse logistics for sure, especially for fast fashion, etc. And actually furniture as well, because you've got, the repacking that's required and a lot of home products. So there definitely is a challenge there. But I think more and more customers are getting used to being charged for returns. And I think it's okay. Next has been doing it for quite a while. There's a lot of other retailers that are kind of jumping on that. So there is also an option, obviously, if you've got bricks to return in store. So I don't think it is a consideration, but I don't think it's one of the biggest headwinds retailers are facing into at the moment.
Jeff, is it something that is a problem for you? I guess people don't tend to return a sofa, do they?
Not so much, but before I was at Swift, I was marketing director for Wiggle, and we had all of those challenges, and we kind of we did a very similar thing. We looked at how easy we were making it for customers to make returns, and that was kind of setting the behavior. The easier it was, the more returns there were. So you can kind of reverse conversion optimize the returns journey to help people, change their behavior a bit. That's totally doable. We saw a lot of impact from that. There's definitely a balancing act, because there's a point where you put people off and they don't place the order in the first place. But I think that's the thing to go and look for, that balancing point.
Okay, look, I'm conscious for time, and I want to finish on a positive note. The retail industry is notoriously incredibly resilient and has always found a way to sort of bounce back. What I want to hear from you is the reasons to be cheerful, I suppose, and optimistic, particularly as we run in towards Christmas. Simon, are you feeling confident in that period?
I am actually, on the basis that two things. I don't have to worry about footfold. The people in revenue management will drop the seat price if they need to fill the planes, and they give me the ability to sell to them. I'm also optimistic for the longer term, that I think there are a couple of kind of opportunities about how retail will evolve. One of which is data. We've kind of alluded to, and we're all getting our heads around that. The other one I don't think we've kind of talked on is the kind of metaverse. Really, what does that mean? So longer term, I think retail will reinvent itself, evolve itself to meet whatever challenges are put in front of it. But they're 2 big opportunities. Data in the short term, the metaverse for the long term, that gives me kind of confidence.
Lou, I can tell you're itching to chip in here.
I wasn't, but yeah, I think there is opportunity and there is optimism. I think, if anything, taking the learns from the pandemic and really reminding ourselves that we are able to weather storms, we are able to pivot quickly, and teams, we've built strong teams that we are able to lead and manage and coach and support virtually or however we choose to work, I think is really key.
Yeah, I'd concur with that. I think this is, whilst it sounds counterintuitive, adversity leads to the opportunity to improve flexibility and agility. And if we can capture the energy through empowering a workforce to innovate, then and allow the mechanisms of innovation to take take us forward, then that's a great learning opportunity for the industry, and that has to be optimistic in my view.
Jeff, a final word from you. Are you sitting comfortably as we head towards Christmas?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, like the guys are saying, I think where you are able to offer the customer something different, and it's a genuine improvement on what the alternative offer out there is for customers, there are still plenty of opportunities. And I think it's certainly, that's our view internally in Swift. It's kind of double down on the stuff that's making us different, the stuff that's worked so far. I tend to find with these things, like, there's a lot of bad news out there. There's not much people can do to go and put the pieces back together. It's things are broken, so we've now got to go and invent something else, and that's very much the mindset internally.
Well, thank you, guys. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. I know we could carry on for another hour quite comfortably. There's lots of things we haven't touched on, like sustainability, but thank you very much. I think the idea is now to bring back Will from Boohoo. Thank you after your, and to open the discussion up to the floor and to any questions that we've got.
Yeah, shall I take the first one, which was from Polly, around how I engage the rest of the business in the change, ensured that we were all on board of how we were trying to evolve things. So thanks for that one, Polly. I've had a bit of time to think about it, which is helpful as well. I think firstly, fortunately, what I'd say is there's a good recognition in the business that the product process needed to evolve, along with other processes as well. The buyers and merchandisers and e-coms teams who along that process could quite easily see some of the system issues and that existed within it, and with the paper-based process as well. So that's always a good starting point, that they're not going to immediately resist us trying to improve things for the better. I think key with Order App, and that's the first part of that process we looked at, was we involved some individuals from buying and merchandising who were not necessarily the most senior, but people who were sort of respected across the floor in terms of how we wanted that to evolve. So they were involved in the design sprint process we ran at the beginning, and sort of defining how that was going to work. So the solution was really initiated in sort of that vision of actually buyers and merchandisers, which meant that we didn't have, from the tech perspective, have to do the sell to the business. It was buyers and merchandisers sort of doing it for themselves essentially, and we were just there to try and make sure we could deliver on that. And then Pim sort of followed up from that, and I suppose in a way we'd proven the point with Order App that we could do something that was good for the buyers and merchandisers. And the key challenge across both of these was, we don't want this to slow us down. Paper's fast. We can scribble down an order quite quickly. We can capture product information really quickly. So it was about finding ways to be efficient, because yes, typing on your phone is not going to be always as quick as scribbling something down on paper, but can you find other ways to make it more efficient and better? You can point out you have to edit things less later on and correct mistakes less, but also what you can do with technology to advise the buyers and merchandisers at the time. So simple things like product ratios by the type of product. And if you're buying a bodycon dress, you can get the app to advise onto the ratios and things you should be buying, and you can do that live.
Another question, if I can just, because I'm conscious of time, from Francis. What major shifts have retailers seen retailers adopt in order to target younger generations, particularly Gen Z, and how successful have they been in your opinion? So I guess, Will, that's definitely one for you, and probably Jeff as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I've been hugely involved in, but obviously we do have a lot of Gen Z customers. I think from the marketing perspective, it's around the channels you use a lot of this side of things. So if you look at sort of social media, different platforms are used by sort of different groups of users, and so you see this evolution towards the likes of TikTok and others which are coming onto the scene, and you see more from that point of view as to how do you market your product in that way. And I suppose the other aspect is, are there different, I mean, you mentioned sustainability previously as well, are there different factors which are important as you go through the generations? Does that change? As you comparing to the millennials with Gen Z, do they have a different approach to these things? And that ultimately comes down to the products that you're selling and the mix that you've got. How do you evolve that as your market shifts? We've got quite a broad range. 16 to 45 is quite a range of ages, and the different brands can therefore tailor sort of their offering and their way of going to market in line with that.
you have anything to add?
Yeah, about 20% of our customers are Gen Z, and we can see when we've surveyed them on like media behavior, they definitely behave differently. You know, they'll go and search on Instagram or Pinterest or TikTok first, whereas older customers might turn to an interiors magazine to help make that decision. The other thing we did was launched a refurbished section. So when we did get some returns, we reworked them and put them back out, and they were really popular with the Gen Z audience because they were looking for, they liked the sustainability angle. They loved the idea that these sofas weren't being thrown away, they were being reworked, and they could buy them for a slightly lower price because, you know, they were cost conscious. So I think it's that mix. I think it's well understood that people's media consumption will be different. I think the thing that's interesting to think about, what do they want to buy and why, and then there may be some differences there for brands.
One of the things we've done, I'm on the board of a disruptor called Sept. We offer digital pop-up space for brands. What we've seen with the most successful brands is they create intense activity on social media ahead of a physical activation, and bring young folk into the real world to engage with their products and their brand story in our Sept spaces. And we've seen an amazing number of occasions where young startup brands have got 300-400 people queuing around the block for a 24-hour pop-up in the real world. And so bringing online brands into the real world and really just activation at a different level, and building the halo from that has been amazing to see. So.
If I may add another view on that, because it's such a hot topic. I think one of the biggest elements that's come out of research in the last few years is this focus on values for Gen Z. So they're looking beyond the tangible products and actually trying to understand what it is that makes a company tick. What's the mission? What's the purpose? What is it actually trying to build for us as a society, and creating a community? So I think more brands, if they understand the customer and they see it as Gen Z, or a big percentage of, it's that element that's going to help brands and businesses
brand story
stand out.
Okay, look, thanks very much to everybody. I'm sorry we've got loads more questions, but we've run out of time. So I've got to hand back to Brian now to say again, thank you to the panel for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Clinton, and a great job sort of facilitating us through that. And a huge thank you to all our speakers. It was really, really interesting. Just very quickly for me, I think we titled this as how to optimize your business in turbulent times, but in reality, a lot of what we've been speaking about is these times are giving us a chance to fundamentally challenge how our businesses operate. So that was really rich to see. On the supply chain front, what is optimizing is kind of very, very different for different situations, which was quite interesting, whether we were talking about just in time or just in case, and what's right for you to win in your market. And the final point for me was that all of this towards the end sort of came down to how do we manage our people through this and support them to make it successful, because ultimately it kind of lands with, either flies or dies with them. So but yeah, really interesting topic, and thank you very much. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks very much indeed, Brian. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for this morning. Thank you very much indeed to all our speakers, to Will and everyone on the panel. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights on retail optimization in this very turbulent time. And thank you to you, our audience, for tuning in and asking those very relevant questions. Please do keep an eye on your inboxes. You'll see an email from us very shortly, and that will have the link to the recording of today's webinar, and you can review it at your pleasure at some future time. Until that time, thank you very much indeed. Take care, and we will look forward to seeing you at another event very soon. Have a very good morning and goodbye.